tell you about a kind of loneliness that coexists with peace. You've been single for a while now, maybe a year, maybe 5, maybe so long you've stopped counting, stopped explaining, stopped apologizing for it. And here's the strange thing, parts of you love it. The freedom, the autonomy, the bed entirely to yourself. But there are other parts, the parts that wake up at 3 in the morning, reaching for someone who isn't there. The parts that wonder if you've been alone so long that you've forgotten how to be with someone. If you've been single for what feels like too long, you know this contradiction intimately. You're not desperately lonely. You've built a life that works, that's full, that's meaningful. But sometimes you wonder, have I built walls so high that no one can climb them? Have I become so self-sufficient that I've made myself unpartnerable? Society tells you that being single means you're incomplete. But you know that's not true. Your life isn't on hold. You're not failing. You're just alone. For longer than you planned. For long enough that it's become part of your identity in ways you never intended. Here's what happens when you're single for a long time. You learn to do everything yourself. You fix things. You make decisions. You handle crises. You become your own partner in all the ways that matter. And that's powerful. That's growth. That's becoming whole. But something else happens too. You've built a fortress, not intentionally, but brick by brick you've constructed walls that keep you safe, protected, self-contained. Psychologists call this protective self-sufficiency. It's the adaptation that happens when you've had to rely on yourself for so long that relying on others starts to feel dangerous. Because here's what you learned. People leave. Relationships end. The only person you can truly count on is yourself. So you stopped making space for someone else. You built your life for one. Perfectly. Completely. Your routines are set. Your space is organized your way. Your emotional regulation happens internally. And when someone tries to enter your world, you realize the door is smaller than you thought. Not because you don't want connection, but because you've survived so long without it that you've forgotten how to create space for it. There's a part of you that stopped believing this would happen. Your inner child got tired of first dates that went nowhere. Tired of hoping and being disappointed. Hoping and being disappointed. Until hoping itself started to feel foolish. So they stopped. Quietly, gradually, they lowered their expectations. They told themselves being single is fine. Maybe love is overrated. Maybe independence is enough. And beneath that rational acceptance, there's grief. Grief for the dreams that didn't come true. Grief for the younger version of you who believed it would be easier than this. That grief, when unprocessed, becomes protective numbness. You stop letting yourself want it too much, because wanting creates vulnerability, and vulnerability, after enough disappointment, feels unbearable. Your inner child learned that it's safer not to dream, and that's both wisdom and tragedy, because the walls that protect you from disappointment also protect you from possibility. Here's something that happens when you're single for a long time. Your standards change. When you're genuinely content in your singleness, the bar for partnership becomes extraordinarily high. Because why would you disrupt your peace for someone who isn't exceptional? So you develop a list: emotional availability, communication, kindness, ambition, attractiveness, humour, stability, adventure, and somewhere in that reasonableness the list became impossible. Not because no one meets those criteria, but because you're comparing every real person to an ideal you've constructed. You're comparing them to your perfectly peaceful solitude. Real people, messy people, imperfect people, they can't compete with that. So you find deal breakers, red flags, reasons why it won't work. Maybe you're right to be discerning, or maybe you've become so comfortable alone that anyone who asks you to adjust feels like a threat instead of an opportunity. Prolonged singleness makes you forget, not how to love, but how to let someone in. You've been the sole inhabitant of your inner world for so long that having a witness feels exposing, vulnerable, almost dangerous. The idea of sharing that space with someone, of being truly known, it's both what you want and what terrifies you most. So when someone gets close, when they want more depth, more access, more of you, you panic. Part of you pulls back, finds reasons to create distance, because letting someone in means risking the peace you've worked so hard to build, and you've forgotten how to trust that vulnerability is worth the risk. You've confused protection with strength, self-sufficiency with wholeness, walls with boundaries. Now you're stuck, wanting connection but terrified of what it requires, because the part of you that learned to survive alone is now the part preventing you from not being alone anymore. When you've been single for a long time, being single becomes part of your identity. You're the independent one, the self-sufficient one, the one who doesn't need a partner to be happy. But that creates a strange resistance to actually meeting someone, because if you fall in love, who are you then? This is the identity crisis of prolonged singleness. You've built so much of your sense of self around not being in a relationship that being in one feels like losing yourself. You've told yourself for years that you're fine alone, and it is true. But what if you want more anyway? What if you want partnership not because you need it, but because you desire it? Can you want a relationship without invalidating all the work you did to be happy without one? Can you be whole alone and still choose to share that wholeness with someone? These questions create paralysis. They make you push away people who might be right for you, because accepting them feels like betraying the identity you've built. Here's a paradox. You learn to love yourself, to be complete alone, and that's beautiful. But somewhere along the way, self-love became self-isolation. You became so good at meeting your own needs that you stopped believing anyone else could meet them. You fill your own cup, you celebrate yourself, you are your own support system, but it also means you don't need anyone. And there's a middle ground you might have missed, the middle ground of interdependence, of choosing someone not because you need them but because you want them, of being whole alone and still desiring to share that wholeness. But you've become so self-contained that desire itself feels foreign. Why would you make yourself vulnerable when self-sufficiency has kept you safe? The answer is, because love isn't about need, it's about choice, about wanting to share your life because life is richer together. But you've been so focused on being okay alone that you've lost sight of why being together might be beautiful. Your inner child needs to hear that they're not broken, that being single for a long time doesn't mean something is wrong with them. They need to hear that their standards aren't too high, their walls aren't too thick, their independence isn't too strong, they're just protective, and that protection was necessary. But they don't need to protect themselves anymore, not from everyone, not forever. They need to hear that it's okay to want connection, that choosing someone doesn't mean they were incomplete. It just means they found someone worth choosing. They need to hear that love doesn't require need, that they can be whole and still want to share, that independence and intimacy aren't opposites. The right person won't ask them to give up themselves. The right person will enhance what they've built, will create something new that's even better than what they built alone. But they have to be willing to let that person in, to lower the walls just enough, to risk the vulnerability they've been avoiding, not recklessly, not desperately, but consciously, intentionally, with the wisdom they've gained from their time alone. So here's what I want you to know. You're allowed to be happy single, and you're allowed to want partnership anyway. You're allowed to be whole alone, and you're allowed to desire companionship. You're allowed to have high standards, and you're allowed to be flexible about what love actually looks like. You're allowed to protect yourself, and you're allowed to take risks on connection. These aren't contradictions. They're both true. You can hold both. You're allowed to grieve the timeline you expected. You're allowed to be frustrated that it's taking so long, but you're also allowed to trust that your singleness has taught you things, made you stronger, shown you what you need and what you won't accept. You're allowed to believe that all this time alone wasn't wasted. It was preparation. It was growth. It was becoming the person who can actually handle the kind of love you deserve, and you're allowed to believe that it's still possible. The inner child who stopped believing needs to hear this most of all. It's not too late. You're not too old. You're not too damaged. You're not too independent. You're just still becoming. And when love comes, you'll be ready. Not despite your time alone, but because of it. Because you know yourself now. You know what you need. You know what you won't tolerate. And you know that you can survive alone. Which means choosing partnership will be exactly that. A choice. Not desperation. Not completion. Not filling a void. Just choosing to share your already full life with someone who makes it even fuller. The walls you built kept you safe, but they also kept you isolated. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to leave a door, not wide open, not unprotected, not without discernment, just ajar. Just enough for the right person to knock, and for you to decide, consciously, whether to let them in.